Emily wiped down the counter of the small diner where she worked almost every day. The night had been long, and only a few customers were left finishing their meals. She was tired, her back ached from carrying heavy trays, and her shoes had worn out from long hours of walking back and forth. But she smiled anyway. Smiling was something she never forgot to do, even when life felt heavy. Emily was only 24, but her life was already full of responsibilities. Her mother was sick at home, unable to work, and the bills for medicine piled up faster than she could count. The waitress job barely paid enough for rent and food, but it was all she had. Her dream of going to school had been pushed aside. For now, her dream was simply to keep the lights on in their small apartment and make sure her mother had everything she needed. It was past 10 at night when the door of the diner opened. A tall figure walked in, ducking slightly under the doorway. Emily glanced up and almost gasped. He was huge, taller than any man she had ever seen. Broad shoulders, long arms, and a presence that filled the room. But what caught her attention most was how quietly he walked in. He didn't rush, didn't demand attention, and his clothes were simple, just jeans and a hoodie. Most of the other customers barely noticed him, but Emily did. Something about him felt familiar, though she couldn't place it. Maybe he had one of those faces people thought they had seen before. She walked up with her usual smile and handed him a menu. "Good evening, sir. Can I get you something warm to drink?" she asked kindly. The man smiled back, a deep but gentle smile. "Coffee, please." "Black." Emily nodded and returned a few minutes later with a hot mug. She set it down in front of him, careful not to spill, and asked if he wanted anything else. He looked tired, like he had been traveling or working all day. He glanced at the menu but didn't seem too interested. "Maybe just something light," he said. "What do you recommend?" Emily thought for a moment. "The diner pie is fresh tonight. Apple. It's sweet but not too heavy. I'll bring you a slice." He nodded, and she hurried off to the kitchen. When she returned with the warm slice of pie, she added a scoop of vanilla ice cream on the side. She knew the menu price didn't include ice cream, but she had seen how worn out he looked. A small kindness, she thought, could brighten his night. The man noticed. "Thank you. This looks good." "You're welcome," Emily said softly. "It's on me. Everyone needs a treat now and then." He chuckled, and for the first time, Emily noticed how warm his laugh was. Deep, strong, yet kind. He ate quietly, sipping coffee, watching the room. From time to time, he looked at Emily as she worked, how she greeted everyone with the same cheerful tone, how she bent down to talk to an older lady who struggled to read the menu, how she didn't rush anyone even though her shift was nearly over. Her manager, however, was less kind. Mr. Grant was a strict man in his 50s who believed kindness wasted money. He stood behind the counter, his eyes sharp like a hawk's. When he saw Emily serving the tall man ice cream she hadn't charged for, his jaw tightened. When the man left, he gave Emily a polite thank you and paid his bill, adding a generous tip. Emily didn't notice the size of it right away, she only smiled and wished him a safe night. But Mr. Grant noticed. The moment the door closed behind the customer, he called her over. "What was that?" he asked in a cold voice. Emily blinked. "What do you mean? You gave away ice cream. That's not free. You know the rules." She hesitated. "It was just a small scoop." He looked tired, "And I thought you thought wrong," Mr. Grant snapped. "This isn't a charity. Every spoon, every slice, every drop counts. We're not here to give away food." Emily lowered her eyes. "I'm sorry, sir. It won't happen again." But Mr. Grant wasn't finished. "This is your last warning. Next time, you're out." Her face flushed with shame. She wanted to explain that she wasn't trying to steal from the diner, that she just wanted to be kind. But she also knew Mr. Grant didn't understand kindness. He cared only for the numbers in the register. Emily nodded silently and returned to work. That night, as she cleaned the last table, her mind wandered back to the tall man. There was something about him, his gentle laugh, the way he seemed so calm despite his size. Who was he? Why did he look so familiar? She couldn't figure it out, but she pushed the thought away. Tomorrow would be another long day, and she had no time to wonder about strangers. She walked home through the chilly night, her bag light on her shoulder, her steps heavy with worry. She thought about her mother sleeping in their small apartment, about the bills waiting on the kitchen table, about how close she was to losing even this simple job. Meanwhile, in a quiet hotel across town, the tall man sat on the edge of his bed. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through the news, his face thoughtful. Shaquille O'Neal was no stranger to attention, but he often traveled quietly, dressed simply, enjoying moments where people didn't recognize him. Tonight had been one of those nights. But he couldn't stop thinking about the waitress. Emily, her name tag had said. She had no idea who he was, and that was refreshing. She didn't treat him like a celebrity. She treated him like a tired man who needed a warm slice of pie and a little kindness. And when her manager scolded her, Shaq had seen the way her shoulders sank, the way she swallowed her pride and stayed calm. He shook his head slowly. He had been around the world, seen people chase after fame and money, but rarely had he seen such simple kindness from someone who had so little herself. He made a mental note. He wasn't sure yet what he would do, but he wasn't going to forget her. Back in her apartment, Emily slipped off her shoes and sat quietly beside her mother's bed. She checked her mom's medicine and whispered softly, "Don't worry, Mom. I'll take care of everything." Her mom smiled weakly, reaching for her hand. Emily held it tightly, even though inside she wondered how much longer she could keep going. She didn't know that her small act of kindness had already started a ripple. She didn't know that the tall stranger she had helped was one of the most famous athletes in the world. And she didn't know that her life was about to change in a way she could never imagine. For now, she only knew she was tired, worried, and holding on to hope by a thin thread. Tomorrow would bring another day, another challenge, and maybe, just maybe, another chance. The next morning came too quickly for Emily. She had barely slept, her mind restless with worry. The sound of her alarm clock pulled her out of a shallow dream, and she rubbed her tired eyes before quietly getting out of bed. Her mother was still asleep, her breathing soft and uneven. Emily tiptoed into the kitchen, heated a kettle, and poured herself a weak cup of tea. She wanted to eat breakfast, but the fridge held little more than a half carton of milk and some leftover bread. She decided she'd eat later at the diner if she could sneak in a small snack. She got dressed in her uniform, the same one she had worn for the last 2 years, slightly faded from washing but still neat. She tied her hair back, slipped on her worn shoes, and whispered to herself, "One more day. Just make it through one more day." The walk to the diner felt longer than usual. The city was just waking up, people rushing to work, buses rolling by, and cars honking at every corner. Emily tried to focus on the simple things: the fresh smell of bread from the bakery she passed, the cheerful bark of a dog waiting for its owner, the way the morning sun painted the tall buildings gold. These little things helped her feel like maybe the day would not be so hard. But as soon as she stepped into the diner, the heaviness returned. Mr. Grant, her manager, stood near the counter with his arms folded tightly across his chest. His expression was already cold, as if he had been waiting for her. "Emily," he said in a sharp tone. "We need to talk. Office. Now." Her stomach dropped. She followed him to the small back room, a space crowded with old boxes, paperwork, and the faint smell of grease. She stood while he sat down at the desk, tapping a pen against a notepad. "I gave you a warning last night," he began without looking up. "And yet you decided my rules don't matter. Giving away food, acting like you own the place." Emily's hands trembled. Sir, it was only 1 scoop of ice cream. The man looked so tired, and he cut her off with a wave of his hand. Excuses. Always excuses. Do you understand what happens if every worker here just gives a little extra? This diner goes broke. We're not a charity. Customers pay, or they don't eat. Simple as that. She swallowed hard. I wasn't stealing. I was just trying to be kind. Kindness doesn't pay bills, he snapped. Not for me, and not for you. You think customers will remember your smile? No. They'll remember if their food was free. And you cost me money. Emily felt heat rise in her face, her heart pounding in her chest. She wanted to argue, to tell him that people came back not only for the food but for how they were treated. She wanted to tell him that a small act of generosity could mean the world to someone. But she saw the way his eyes glared at her, sharp and closed off. He wasn't listening. I'm sorry, she whispered. He leaned back in his chair and let out a slow sigh, as though the decision had already been made long before this conversation. You're fired, Emily. Clean out your locker. Don't come back tomorrow. Her breath caught in her throat. Fired. The word echoed in her ears like a bell. She couldn't move for a moment. Couldn't speak. Everything inside her seemed to collapse at once. Sir, please, she tried, her voice shaking. I need this job. My mom, she's sick. I pay her medicine with this. I can't just, that's not my problem, he said flatly, picking up a stack of papers as if the conversation was over. You should have thought of that before giving away free food. Maybe next time you'll learn. Emily bit down on her lip to stop herself from crying in front of him. With trembling hands, she untied her apron and laid it on the desk. She turned and walked out, her legs stiff, her vision blurry. The other waitresses glanced at her as she walked past, some whispering to each other, others looking away. Nobody spoke up for her. Nobody said a word. In a world where everyone was barely holding on, no one dared risk their own job. She pushed open the door of the diner and stepped into the street. The bright morning sun felt too harsh, too cruel. She wrapped her arms around herself and walked quickly, her heart heavy with fear. What would she tell her mother? How would she pay the rent? The medicine? Everything she had worked so hard for seemed to vanish in a single morning. On the way home, she sat on a bench near the park and tried to steady her breathing. She replayed the conversation over and over in her head, wishing she had explained herself better, wishing Mr. Grant had an ounce of compassion. But she also knew the truth, he never cared. As she sat there, tears rolling down her cheeks, she thought about the tall man from last night. He had been kind, respectful, even grateful for her small gesture. She didn't even know his name. She wondered if he had noticed the way her manager treated her. She wondered if he would even remember her face. But what did it matter? Strangers passed through life all the time. They left as quickly as they came. Finally, she wiped her face and forced herself to stand. She had to go home. Her mother would be awake soon, and she couldn't let her see her broken like this. She needed to stay strong, at least on the outside. When she opened the door to their apartment, her mother was already sitting at the table with a blanket around her shoulders. She smiled weakly. "You're home early, sweetheart." Emily's throat tightened. She forced a smile. "Yeah, it was a slow morning. They let me leave early." Her mother reached for her hand, her eyes filled with quiet concern. "Don't push yourself too hard. We'll be okay." Emily nodded but didn't speak. She didn't have the strength to tell the truth yet. Not now. Later, she would have to. But at that moment, all she could do was sit beside her mother, hold her hand, and pretend everything was fine. The rest of the day dragged on in silence. Emily tried to distract herself by cleaning, cooking a simple meal, and writing down numbers to see if she had enough savings to last a few weeks. The answer was no. She was already behind. The medicine alone cost more than she had in her bank account. That night, as she lay awake staring at the ceiling, she whispered a quiet prayer. Please, just give me a chance. Something. Anything. She didn't know that across town, the tall man she had served was also awake. He remembered her smile, her kindness, and the unfair way she was treated. He had recognized the fear in her eyes when the manager scolded her. And though she didn't know it yet, her story wasn't finished. In fact, it was only beginning. Emily woke up the next morning with a heavy heart. Her eyes felt swollen from crying, and her body carried the weight of yesterday's pain. She had spent the whole night turning from one side to the other, wondering what she was going to do next. The thought of being jobless scared her more than anything. Bills were waiting on the table, her rent was due soon, and her mother's medicine needed to be refilled in just 3 days. Every problem seemed to scream at her all at once, leaving her drained before the day had even begun. She tried to put on a brave face as she prepared breakfast for her mother. She toasted the last slices of bread and poured tea into 2 cups. She smiled gently when she carried the tray to the table. Her mother smiled back, but Emily could see the questions in her eyes. She hadn't yet told her the truth. They ate in silence until her mother spoke. You're quiet this morning, dear. Is everything okay at work? Emily forced a small smile. It's fine, Mom. Things are a little stressful, but I'll manage. Her mother reached across the table and held her hand. You've always managed. I know you will again. Emily nodded, trying not to let her eyes water. She didn't want her mother to worry. After breakfast, Emily stepped outside to clear her head. She decided to take a walk through the nearby park. The cool air helped her breathe a little easier. She sat down on a bench and watched children running, laughing, and chasing each other while their parents sat nearby. Life looked so simple for them. She envied that simplicity, wondering when her own life had last felt that light. As she sat there, she had no idea that something extraordinary was about to happen. Not too far away, Shaquille O'Neal was preparing for the day. The night before, he had replayed his experience at the diner in his mind over and over again. The young waitress's face, Emily's kindness, her patience, the way she had treated him like a normal person stood out clearly. He remembered the look on her face when the manager scolded her, the way she quietly accepted the humiliation without arguing back. That image had stayed with him, tugging at his heart. Shaq was a man who had seen fame, money, and success on a level most people only dream of, but he never forgot the simple things in life. He believed in kindness and in helping others whenever he could. And he couldn't ignore what had happened to Emily. He decided he needed to do something. By the afternoon, news reporters were already buzzing around the area. Shaq had quietly arranged for a small press gathering in front of the very diner where Emily had worked. Word spread quickly that the basketball legend was in town, and curious people started gathering. Meanwhile, Emily had returned home. She was sitting at the kitchen table, going through her small stack of bills when a knock came at the door. She frowned, surprised. They didn't usually get visitors. She stood up, wiped her hands on her skirt, and opened the door. What she saw made her freeze in shock. On the other side stood a group of reporters with cameras and microphones. Behind them, towering above everyone else, stood Shaquille O'Neal himself. His tall frame was impossible to miss, his warm smile shining as he looked directly at her. Emily's jaw dropped, and for a moment, she couldn't move or speak. "Hello, Emily," Shaq said in his deep, friendly voice. She blinked, her mind racing. She suddenly remembered the tall man from the diner, the man she had served coffee and pie. She had thought he looked familiar, but never in her wildest dreams had she imagined it was him. "Why you?" she stammered. "You're Shaquille O'Neal." He chuckled softly. "That's me. But you can just call me Shaq." The cameras clicked rapidly, capturing every second of her stunned expression. Her neighbors peeked out from their doors, whispering in surprise as they watched the scene unfold. Emily's heart pounded as she tried to gather her thoughts. I don't understand. Why are you here? Shaq's expression softened. Because of you, Emily. Last night, you showed me kindness when you didn't have to. You gave me your time, your smile, and even a piece of pie with ice cream. That might not sound like much to some people, but to me, it meant everything. You didn't know who I was, and you treated me like any other person. That's rare. Emily's eyes filled with tears. She didn't know what to say. Shaq turned to the reporters and spoke louder so everyone could hear. This young woman right here lost her job for being kind. She got fired because she gave me a small scoop of ice cream. Can you believe that? Someone punished her for doing the right thing. Gasps and murmurs spread through the small crowd of neighbors. Cameras flashed as Shaq placed a hand gently on Emily's shoulder. That's not right, he continued. Kindness should never cost someone their job. So I came here today to make sure Emily knows she's not alone, and to let the world know her story. Emily covered her mouth with her hands as tears spilled down her cheeks. She couldn't believe this was happening. Just yesterday, she had been fired, hopeless and scared. And now, one of the most famous athletes in the world was standing at her door, defending her with kindness and respect. The reporters rushed forward, asking Emily questions. How do you feel right now? Did you know it was Shaq you were serving? What would you like to say to your old boss? Emily shook her head, overwhelmed. Her voice trembled as she said softly, I just did what anyone should do. I didn't think it was a big deal. I was only trying to be kind. Shaq smiled and nodded. And that's exactly why it's such a big deal. The crowd clapped, neighbors cheering loudly. Emily's mother, hearing the noise, came slowly to the door. When she saw Shaq standing there, she nearly stumbled back in surprise. Emily quickly rushed to her side, holding her hand as tears streamed down both their faces. Shaq bent slightly so he could speak gently to Emily's mother. You raised a good daughter. She has a kind heart. And I think it's time the world knows it. The elderly woman's eyes filled with gratitude as she whispered, Thank you. Shaq looked back at Emily and said, This is just the beginning. I have something important to share with you tomorrow. But today, I just wanted to make sure everyone knows how special you are. Emily's hands trembled as she tried to process everything. Yesterday, she had been invisible, just another waitress struggling to survive. Today, she was at the center of something she never imagined, her kindness shining under the brightest light possible. For the first time in a long time, Emily felt hope. She didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but she knew her life was about to change forever. Emily barely slept that night. Her tiny apartment, which usually felt so quiet, now carried the weight of everything that had happened earlier in the day. She had gone from being fired and hopeless to standing at her front door with cameras flashing and Shaquille O'Neal himself praising her kindness. It was too much for her mind to process. She kept replaying the moment in her head, his towering frame, his gentle voice, the way he had spoken to the reporters as if she truly mattered. For the first time in years, Emily felt like someone had noticed her not for her mistakes but for her heart. Her mother sat up late with her, holding her hand. I told you, Emily, she whispered. The good you give will always come back to you. Maybe not when you expect it, but it never disappears. Emily wanted to believe that, but the practical side of her mind worried. She was still jobless. She still had bills due. She still had a sick mother depending on her. And she didn't want to hope too much, in case everything was just a temporary dream. The following morning, Emily woke to the sound of knocking again. She jumped up, thinking it might be the reporters returning. But when she opened the door, it was quieter this time. No cameras, no flashing lights, just Shaquille O'Neal, standing there with a warm smile. "Good morning, Emily," he said in his deep voice. Her heart raced as she stepped aside to let him in. Her mother, who had been resting in bed, gasped softly when she saw him again. Shaq greeted her kindly, shaking her hand as if they were old friends. "I promised you yesterday that I had something important to share," he said, sitting carefully on one of the small chairs that looked almost too tiny for him. "And I always keep my promises." Emily sat across from him, her hands twisting nervously in her lap. She couldn't imagine what he was about to say. Shaq leaned forward. "First, I want you to know I already took care of your rent. You don't have to worry about it for the rest of the year." Emily gasped, her hand flying to her mouth. What? You did what?" He chuckled softly. "Yes. Your landlord knows everything is paid. You won't have to stress about that anymore." Tears filled her eyes as she shook her head in disbelief. I don't even know what to say." "There's more," Shaq continued, his voice steady but gentle. "I also made sure your mother's medical bills are covered. A foundation I work with will take care of her treatments, her medicine, and her check UPS. She deserves the best care, and so do you." Emily burst into tears, covering her face with her hands. Her mother reached across and held her arm tightly, her own eyes wet with emotion. For years, Emily had struggled with the weight of those bills, lying awake night after night wondering how she would manage. And now, in a single moment, that burden had been lifted. Shaq gave her time to breathe before he spoke again. "But Emily, this is not just about money. I don't want to just pay your bills and walk away. That wouldn't be enough. What I saw in you at that diner was rare. Kindness. Patience. A heart for people. And I want to give you a chance to use those gifts." Emily blinked, wiping her tears quickly. "What do you mean?" "I have several community programs," he explained. "We help kids from tough neighborhoods, families who are struggling, people who need hope. And I think you would be perfect to work with us. It's a job where your kindness will matter. You'll get paid well, and you'll finally be valued for the very thing that cost you your last job." Emily's jaw dropped. She stared at him, her mind spinning. A job? Not just any job, but one where she could actually make a difference? She didn't even know how to respond. Are you serious?" she asked softly. Shaq smiled. "Completely serious. If you say yes, you can start next week." Her mother squeezed her hand tightly. "Say yes, Emily. This is what you deserve." Emily's tears returned, but this time they were tears of joy. "Yes. Of course, yes. I'll do it." Shaq stood up, towering over the tiny living room, and extended his hand. Emily stood too, trembling as she shook it. His grip was strong but gentle, and his smile reassured her that this was real. "Good," he said. "Then it's settled. You're part of the team now." News of Shaq's surprise visit spread quickly. By evening, neighbors had gathered outside, cheering for Emily and congratulating her. Some brought small gifts, others just wanted to hug her. For the first time in a long while, her little apartment was filled with laughter, joy, and hope. But what touched Emily the most was not the cameras, not the cheers, not even the money. It was the way Shaq looked at her and her mother with respect, as if they were equals, not people to be pitied. He didn't treat her like a charity case. He treated her like someone who deserved better, someone whose kindness was finally being recognized. Later that night, after the crowd had gone and the apartment was quiet again, Emily sat by the window, staring out at the city lights. Her mother was already asleep, smiling peacefully for the first time in weeks. Emily pressed her hand against the glass and whispered, "Thank you, God. Thank you for sending him." She thought back to that simple moment in the diner, the slice of pie, the scoop of ice cream, the decision to show kindness even when her manager glared at her. She had thought it was nothing. Just a tiny act in an ordinary night. But now she realized how powerful even the smallest act of kindness could be. It had started a chain of events that changed her life. Across town, Shaq sat in his hotel room, smiling as he thought about Emily. He had met thousands of people in his life, but something about her had stood out. He admired her strength, her humility, and her kindness. He felt proud to have played a part in changing her future. The next morning, the story appeared in newspapers and on TV. Headlines read, "Waitress fired for kindness gets life-changing help from Shaq." People across the country shared her story, inspired by her courage and her heart. Messages poured in from strangers offering encouragement, job opportunities, and donations. Emily's phone rang non-stop, but through it all, she stayed humble, always saying the same thing, "I didn't do anything special. I just tried to be kind." Yet deep down, she knew her life had changed forever. She was no longer the invisible waitress struggling in silence. She was Emily, the young woman whose kindness had caught the attention of the world. And the best part was yet to come. Emily's life began to feel like a story she once thought only happened in movies. Just a few days earlier, she had been walking home from the diner with her head low, terrified of how she would keep her mother safe without a paycheck. Now she was waking up every morning with a sense of hope, a sense that maybe, just maybe, things were finally turning around. The news spread faster than she ever imagined. On television, her story was told again and again, the kind waitress who was fired for showing humanity and who found unexpected support from Shaquille O'Neal. People she had never met before stopped her on the street just to say, "We're proud of you," or "Thank you for reminding us kindness still matters." At first, Emily felt shy about the attention. She wasn't used to being seen. But slowly, she realized this was not just about her. Her story had become a reminder for everyone that small acts of kindness carried power. When she officially started her new job with Shaq's Community Foundation, she was nervous. She didn't know what to expect. She worried she wasn't good enough or skilled enough. But on her very first day, she was welcomed with open arms. The staff treated her like family, not like a newcomer who didn't belong. They showed her the programs feeding children, helping single parents, arranging sports activities for kids who had no safe place to play. Emily felt her heart swell as she watched children laughing and running on the basketball court, many of them wearing sneakers donated through the foundation. She thought about how those kids might have grown up without opportunities if not for this place. And now she was part of it. Shaq visited often, towering over everyone with his big smile, cracking jokes, but always with a heart focused on giving back. One afternoon, as Emily worked on organizing supplies, he stopped beside her and said, "See? I told you your kindness had a place here." She smiled shyly. "I just never imagined my life would change like this." He nodded. "That's how life works sometimes. You do good, and when you least expect it, good finds its way back to you." Those words stayed with her. Every day, as she worked with families and kids, she realized how true they were. For the first time in her life, her job wasn't just about surviving. It was about living with purpose. At home, her mother's health improved with proper care and steady medicine. Emily no longer had to choose between paying rent and buying pills. For the first time in years, their small apartment felt like a home filled with peace instead of fear. But what touched Emily most was how people reacted to her story. Letters arrived at her door, sent from across the country. Some wrote, "I was losing hope, but your story gave me strength." Others sent small donations, insisting they wanted to help her continue her kindness. One letter from a little girl said, "I want to be like you when I grow up. I want to be kind." Emily read that one over and over again, her heart touched beyond words. Even the diner where she had once worked faced consequences. The manager, Mr. Grant, had thought firing her would be the end of it. But when the story went public, the diner was flooded with angry reviews and boycotts. Customers who had once filled the booths refused to come back. In the end, he was forced to close the business. Emily didn't celebrate his downfall, though. When reporters asked her about it, she only said, "I don't hold anger. I just hope he learns that treating people with kindness will always go further than fear." Her response surprised many, but it was truly who Emily was. Even after everything, she held no bitterness. Months passed, and Emily grew more confident in her role. She learned to manage events, organize food drives, and even speak at schools where she encouraged children never to give up on kindness. Each time she stood before a group, she remembered the frightened girl she had been just months before, and she reminded herself how far she had come. One evening, Shaq invited Emily and her mother to a special gala hosted by the foundation. It was a large event filled with community leaders, families, and volunteers. Emily felt out of place at first, dressed in a simple gown, but Shaq walked her through the hall proudly, introducing her as the young woman who reminded me why kindness matters. When it came time for speeches, Shaq stepped onto the stage. Cameras flashed as he spoke about the importance of giving back, about lifting others up. Then he turned to Emily, calling her to the stage. Her legs trembled as she walked up, the spotlight blinding, the room full of faces. But when she reached the microphone, she took a deep breath and spoke from her heart. "I never thought I'd be standing here," she began. "Not long ago, I was just a waitress, trying to make ends meet. I didn't feel seen. I didn't feel important. But one night, I chose to be kind. And that choice cost me my job. I thought I had lost everything. But what I didn't know was that kindness doesn't disappear. It grows. And because of one act, I stand here today, not only with hope but with a chance to give hope to others." The room erupted in applause, many people rising to their feet. Tears filled Emily's eyes as she continued. "I've learned something important. You don't need money or fame or power to change the world. You just need a kind heart. One smile, one helping hand, one act of compassion, it can mean everything to someone. It did for me. And I promise I'll keep passing it on." When she stepped down, Shaq hugged her like a proud brother. Her mother wiped tears from her eyes, watching her daughter transform before her. That night, as Emily lay in bed, she reflected on her journey. From the moment she carried coffee and pie to a stranger, to the cruel words of her manager, to the knock on her door that changed her life, everything had been like chapters in a book she never thought she'd live. She realized that sometimes life had to break you a little to prepare you for something bigger. Losing her job had felt like the end, but it had been the beginning of something greater. From then on, Emily no longer saw herself as just a waitress. She was a daughter, a caregiver, a friend, and now, a voice for kindness. Her story had reached people across the world, but more importantly, it had reminded her of her own worth. And as she drifted off to sleep, her last thought was simple but powerful: if kindness is all I have, then it's more than enough.